Today's story is one that should strike a chord in everyone, particularly women. But if you're a man watching this, chances are there are women in your life that you deeply care for. So this case should still scare the hell out of you. We're going back to what was a difficult time for many, June 2020. During the COVID lockdown in London, residents had been ordered to stay home for nearly 3 months at that point. Bibaa Henry was a well-respected social worker, and she was taking the lockdown seriously. So as her 46th birthday approached, she opted for a small gathering at a park where her friends and family would be socially distanced from one another. Bibaa sent this text invite. Please bring a blanket, lights, snacks, and a drink of your choice. Let's have a catch-up, play some sophisticated music, watch the sunset, and take it from there. One of the people who RSVP'd was Bibaa's younger half-sister, Nicole Smallman. Nicole was a freelance photographer and artist, and despite the 20-year age gap between the sisters, they were really close. Nicole helped Bibaa set up her birthday picnic, going to buy snacks and then heading to the park, finding a secluded spot on the top of the hill where they scattered cushions and blankets to add ambiance to the evening. The sisters also brought some fairy string lights and glow sticks. As the rest of their group arrived, they watched as the sky turned to a mix of purple and pinks as the sun went down. Photos taken that night show it was an intimate evening of loved ones singing, dancing, laughing, and just enjoying being reunited. Eventually, guests began to disperse, leaving just Bibaa and Nicole behind. The sisters continued to enjoy their night and took photos of each other dancing around with their fairy lights. Throughout the night, Nicole had been texting her boyfriend Adam via WhatsApp. At 1:04 a.m., she sent him a message that read, "I'm dancing in a field," with an emoji of a woman dancing. She followed up with another text, "Going home soon." The following morning, Bibaa and Nicole's mother, Olivia Smallman, sent a text to both girls asking how the birthday picnic went. But the girls never responded. Meanwhile, Nicole's boyfriend Adam was starting to worry. Nicole hadn't texted him that she had gotten home safely like normal. And when Adam reached out to Nicole's flatmate, she told him that Nicole never came home, which was highly out of character. Adam went to Bibaa's home hoping Nicole had decided to crash there, but no one answered the door. And by that evening, he was starting to panic. Soon after, Bibaa and Nicole's mom, Wilhelmina, spoke with Adam, and realizing that no one had heard from either of her daughters, she called the police. The next morning, with a full day without contact from either woman, friends began spreading the word on social media, asking for help in finding the sisters. By this point, the police hadn't yet conducted any searches for the women, so loved ones of the girls took it upon themselves, including Nicole's boyfriend, Adam. Adam headed to the park where the picnic had been held 2 days prior. There, he met up with a friend of the sisters who had been at the party. Her name was Nina. Nina showed Adam to the spot in the 250-acre park where the friends had celebrated on top of a hill. All of the blankets and cushions and fairy lights were gone, which gave the impression that the sisters had packed up their belongings that night and left the park. But the friends decided to search the park regardless. As they scoured the area, Nina found a pair of designer glasses mangled in the dirt, and she immediately recognized them as belonging to Bibaa. The state they were in suggested that there may have been some type of struggle, so Nina called the police, who asked her to come bring the glasses straight to them. Nina updated Adam, who was still searching another area of the park along with his parents. When he texted Nina that he wasn't sure what to do, she responded, "If you can bear it, just keep looking." Shortly after, Adam's father called out to him. Nearby was a long trail of flattened grass, and lying on the ground was a large knife engraved with the brand name Taylor's Eyewitness. Adam dialed emergency services and began explaining the situation to a dispatcher while running along the stretch of flattened grass. The trail led towards a strip of wooded area with a row of trees, and poking out from beneath them was a pair of shoes. Adam ran around to a gap in the bushes where he was met with a horrifying sight. About 1 foot from him lay the bodies of the 2 women intertwined together. It was Bibaa and Nicole, and it looked as though they were locked in an embrace with their limbs wrapped around one another. Bibaa's clothing had been pulled up over her head, and she had been stabbed numerous times. Her back was covered in abrasions from being dragged through the rough undergrowth. Nicole's clothing had been yanked up above her abdomen, and she too had abrasions and stab wounds, and her injuries were far more extensive than her sister's. Her eyes were open, and as Adam looked at his girlfriend's face, he knew that she was dead. He fell to the ground and let out several guttural screams, which was heard by the dispatcher on the other end. Officers from London's Metropolitan Police descended on the park. With the grounds stretching for 250 acres, they were facing an enormous crime scene. Meanwhile, Wilhelmina Smallman got the phone call that turned her life upside down.
I just remember screaming, really. Just screaming. You know, there's that, please don't let this be.
Further examinations confirmed that whoever had killed the 2 women had dragged them by the feet into the bushes and deliberately posed them in the way they were found, which is so disturbing. Perhaps as a way to further degrade them, I don't know. I mean, we hear about victims being posed in sexual positions, which in this case, the killer did lift up their clothing, but to think about the killer posing them in an embrace, really, really chilling. 46-year-old Bibaa Henry had sustained 6 stab wounds to her chest, 1 to her groin and 1 to her back. She had no defensive wounds, indicating that her killer had caught her by surprise. Her 27-year-old sister, Nicole, would have been witness to her sister's attack. This absolutely kills me thinking about these cases where multiple people are killed and we know that one of them had to watch, particularly a case like this where it's 2 sisters. It's hard to talk about. Unlike Bibaa, Nicole had numerous defensive injuries and her attack had been far more brutal, likely because she had tried to fight back. She had been stabbed 28 times and had injuries to her chest, back, thighs, hips, shoulder, arms, and hands. Fryent Country Park, where this all occurred, remained closed off to the public while police scoured the grounds for further evidence. They inspected the knife that was found by the women's bodies, and testing revealed that the blood belonged to 2 different people, Nicole and an unidentified male. A pair of blue latex gloves was also found. One of the gloves was heavily stained with blood and damaged along the center as though it was slashed with a knife. Investigators were able to obtain a DNA profile from the blood on various pieces of evidence found at the scene, and it was all from the same unidentified male. But despite having the suspected killer's DNA, there was no match in the national DNA database. Now, divers searched a pond in the park for possible evidence, and they recovered 2 smartphones which belonged to Bibaa and Nicole. A forensic examination would reveal that the last contact they had had with friends or family was when Nicole texted her boyfriend Adam just after 1 a.m. on that Saturday morning. Between 1:26 a.m. and 4 a.m., someone had repeatedly tried to gain access to Bibaa's phone. Its screen had been turned off, then on again, at least 130 times. Thanks to a step counter on the phone, police could see that whoever had been holding it had walked over a mile during that time before switching the phone off and throwing it into the pond. Also found on the device was a number of photos that the sisters had taken throughout the night. Bibaa and Nicole had set up a self-timer and draped themselves with fairy lights and snapped more than 100 pictures together as they laughed and danced in the dark. It's just so heartbreaking. The final photograph was taken at 1:13 a.m. In this image, the women appear distracted instead of posing like they had been in other shots. Both were looking to their left as though something in that direction had drawn their attention. Detectives suspected that this was the moment their attacker had made himself known. Literally gives me chills. No one who knew Bibaa and Nicole could think of anyone who would want to harm them, and there was nothing in either of the women's lives that pointed to them being targeted by someone that they knew. And on top of that, the suspected killer's DNA that had been collected at the scene belonged to an unknown male, which further pointed to the theory that this had been a completely random attack. Detectives went to the public with this information, telling journalists that they believed the women were murdered by a stranger, and they needed the public's help in finding him. The suspect they were looking for had likely suffered an injury during the attack, which would have resulted in significant bleeding. They wanted anyone who had seen someone injured or acting suspiciously around this park to call them. However, some people who knew the sisters, including their mother, felt that the brutal double murder was not receiving enough press attention to really generate worthwhile leads. Although London's media had reported on the crime, it wasn't receiving front page coverage or any national coverage, and the subdued nature of the coverage really seemed at odds with the terrifying theory that this was a random attack, a brutal double murder. But then, 2 weeks after the murders, news broke that finally seemed to capture the press's attention. A fairly new police officer was caught sending photos of the two sisters' bodies in a WhatsApp chat and sent messages such as, quote, "I'm sat next to two dead birds full of stab wounds." And he sent a selfie of himself with the bodies. And then there was yet another officer at the crime scene who, against all protocol, of course, also took photos of the sisters' bodies on his cell phone and sent them to a group chat. Eventually, this got back to the higher-ups at the police department, and both officers were actually arrested for misconduct in public office. And from there, the news got out to Nicole and Bibaa's family and ultimately the general public. For the sisters' loved ones, this pushed them over the edge. They'd already felt that law enforcement hadn't taken the case seriously from the start, seeing as friends and loved ones were the ones who had to do the first search for the women and ultimately find their bodies. And overall, family took note of how cases of missing white women seemed to generate much more media attention than the sisters' disappearances and subsequent murders. In the wake of the misconduct allegations, the family and the public's trust in the Metropolitan Police Service took a big hit. But detectives continued working hard to solve the case behind the scenes. The suspect's DNA hadn't matched anyone in the National DNA database, so detectives asked the National Crime Agency to run it against their records for a familial match this time. We don't have anything like this in the States. Anyhow, there was a hit in that database. Detectives discovered their suspect was related to a man named Kamal Hussein, who had previously received a police caution. The DNA indicated the suspect was a close family member of Kamal's, most likely his child, which brings us to Kamal's firstborn, a son he had often worried about, 18-year-old Daniel. Kamal had told people in his life that he was concerned that Daniel had gotten mixed up in the wrong crowd and really didn't feel great about the direction his 18-year-old son was heading in. In October 2017, when Daniel was 15 years old, his teachers discovered that he had been accessing far-right propaganda and looking for images of corpses on school computers. The school then referred him to Prevent, the UK's government's counter-extremist program. Prevent was designed to stop vulnerable individuals from being groomed and drawn into terrorist organizations, such as the extremist Islamic group ISIS. Teenagers like Daniel, who were fairly socially isolated and from immigrant backgrounds, were seen as being especially susceptible to being radicalized. Daniel was assigned a mentor and was discharged from Prevent just over 6 months later. Supervisors determined that they had no outstanding concerns at the time with respect to violent extremism or terrorism. They continued to provide support and did 2 more reviews of Daniel's case over the next year. And again, they said they had no reason for concern and deemed that there was no further intervention necessary. Anyhow, armed with this DNA evidence, detectives raced to gain access to CCTV footage from various cameras surrounding Kamal and Daniel's home. And shortly thereafter, investigators had recovered some incredibly alarming footage on the afternoon of Wednesday, June 3rd, 2 days before Bibaa's birthday picnic. Daniel left his father's address and headed to a supermarket where security cameras captured him browsing the aisles of the store before selecting a Taylor's Eyewitness knife block, which contained a set of 5 black-handled kitchen knives, along with some chewing gum, a couple cans of drinks, lemons, and candles. Later that day, he returned to the same store to buy some extra strong Unibond power tape. And 2 days later, the day of the sisters' picnic, he also collected 2 folding shovels and a ski mask that he had ordered online. Later that evening, just before 9 p.m., cameras caught Daniel entering the park, the same park that the sisters had their picnic. And he was seen carrying a backpack and wearing blue latex gloves. The next time he would appear on camera was almost 7 hours later at 3 a.m. when he was captured leaving the pitch black park, and he had removed the pants he was wearing earlier and tied his jacket around his waist, leaving his lower legs exposed. His right hand was tucked tightly into his jacket waistband. Cameras tracked Daniel back to his father's home, which he reached around 4 a.m. After he knocked on the front door, his father opened it, and Daniel disappeared inside. Now, after the discovery, it was time for officers to bring Daniel in for questioning, of course. This is a lot of evidence.
Mate, you're under arrest. Come out the address. Keep walking towards me. Keep walking towards me. Stay where you are, stay where you are, stay where you are. Hands on your head, stay where you are. Face me, hands on your head, stay where you are. You're under arrest, all right?
Anyhow, multiple injuries were visible on his right hand, his middle finger, and a deep cut was near the tip of one of his fingers, which had been stitched up. When investigators asked him about these cuts that had recently been stitched up, Daniel told them that he was getting robbed, and that's when these cuts happened, and he didn't want to say anything further.
Do you have any injuries?
Yeah.
The wrists from the cuffs?
No.
Oh. How did that happen? How did that happen?
Sorry?
How did that happen?
I was getting robbed and
While he was being interviewed, officers searched his mother's home, and in his bedroom there, they found blue latex gloves that matched the ones found in the park. And in his closet, they found the ski mask and one of the folding shovels that he had bought 1 day before the murders. And then there's this. A book of spells was found in Daniel's room, along with some hand-drawn pictures of what looked like occult symbols. Officers also found a piece of paper taken from a loose-leaf folder that was covered in handwriting that was titled Agreement. It appeared to be some type of contract, and it read, "Perform a minimum of 6 sacrifices every 6 months for as long as I am free and physically capable. Sacrifice only women, build a temple for you, do everything that I have promised. For me, win the Mega Millions super jackpot. To receive fruitful rewards in return for the future sacrifices I make to you, the rewards could consist of wealth and power. To never be suspected of any crimes by the police, and also that the police will never know of any crimes that I have done and that I will do." At the bottom of the page were the words "signed by," followed by 2 spaces for 2 signatures. One was for this King Lucifer person, which was left blank, and the other was signed by Daniel, and he signed his name in blood. Anyhow, research would uncover that this Lucifer person, who, again, I apologize, I can't pronounce his name, we'll put it on the screen. He was a demon named in the 18th or 19th century book, the Grand Grimoire, and this occult text contains instructions for summoning the demon. Investigators realized that they had just uncovered a motive. Daniel had seemingly believed that if he murdered women as a sacrificial offering to this demon that he believed in, he would win the lottery, gain power, and escape police attention. Investigators found another document in Daniel's possessions that was handwritten to yet another demon, and in this note, Daniel requested that the demon make a particular girl at his school fall in love with him and believe that he was the only person for her. He said he also wanted to be more attractive to women romantically. In exchange for these things, Daniel would burn incense every 2 weeks and make offerings of sweet drinks and chocolate, burn red candles, and shed more blood. That letter is so fascinating to me because we're getting a glimpse into a seemingly, well, he's obviously not a regular teenage boy, but this is like a regular teenage boy thought, to feel insecure and wish that you could somehow be more attractive to women, particularly one that you have feelings for. So, based on these documents, it was clear that Daniel had intended to kill more women. Investigators believe that his injuries to his right hand that occurred during Bibaa and Nicole's murder had prevented more bloodshed within the last few weeks. And the evidence against Daniel only continued to pile up. His DNA was a match to the male DNA found at the crime scene. And the day before the murder, it turns out that he set up an online betting account which ran bets on the Mega Millions super jackpot. And his bank records show that he had placed 5 Mega Million bets, and that was the lottery that was named in his blood-signed contract. The prize total was £321 million. Next to the contract, officers found 3 lottery tickets purchased a few days after the murders. When investigators looked at Daniel's phone and other electronics, they could see clearly just how fixated he was on all this occult stuff. Hours prior to his arrest, Daniel had gone online and logged into a forum that was owned by an American man named E.A. Cotting. Cotting was a misogynist, a neo-Nazi, and a kind of occult influencer. Unlike more mainstream pagan religions such as Wicca, which emphasize nature-based spirituality, Cotting's occultism encouraged violence and harmful practices. The forum that he ran was part of a larger website where he sold merchandise, shared spells and occult instructions, and offered one-on-one classes to his followers. He encouraged people to commit ritualistic murders and instructed them on selecting victims and described how to kill someone with a knife. Cotting was affiliated with a self-described satanic neo-Nazi group in the US called the Order of Nine Angels, or ONA. Daniel Hussein had joined Cotting's forum 2 years earlier in March 2018, and at the time, remember, he was being supervised by the counterterrorism program PREVENT, but they were monitoring him for signs of Islamic extremism, and nothing was found by PREVENT, so they stopped checking up on him. And his obsession with demons only grew over time. It appeared that Daniel's contract with that Lucifer character had been directly inspired by Cotting's work. See, Cotting had told his followers that that particular demon was the best one to enter in a pact with, But he said they would also have to take real-world action to ensure their wishes would be fulfilled. He provided detailed instructions for writing up pacts, including that the contract writer should request wealth and sign the document in their own blood. The pact should also be brought before the demon by candlelight, and when Daniel bought the knife that he used to kill Bibaa and Nicole, he had also purchased some candles. Now, Cotting's real name is Matthew Lawrence, and he's based in Utah. He has a number of prior convictions for drug and weapon possession charges, and at the time of Daniel's arrest, Cotting had a large social media following with over 100,000 followers on Facebook and nearly 100,000 YouTube subscribers. After the link between Cotting and Daniel was made public, there was backlash that would lead to a lot of platforms such as Facebook and YouTube removing his content. However, as of this video, as of me recording this right now, Amazon still sells his books. So that's absolutely insane, but it's true. Now, this is an interesting tidbit about the case. Detectives were not able to really uncover the full extent of Daniel Hussein's radicalism, as he refused to provide the password to his laptop and iPad, and he had also thrown his phone away, so it would not fall into police hands. This is interesting because a lot of people, I think, just assume if you're arrested and charged with a crime that police are able to get full access to all of your data, but this case is an example of how that's not true. So in an attempt to gain access to more of Daniel's data, the UK's Crown Prosecution Service took the matter to the US courts in an attempt to force Apple to hand over that information. However, an American judge ruled against their application, finding that there hadn't been evidence offered that there was anything that was going to be found on Daniel's devices that would directly link him to the murders. So we don't know what's on there. Daniel was charged with 2 counts of murder. Prosecutors theorized that he had selected the 2 sisters to be his first 2 victims after having his attention drawn to them by the fairy lights that they were dancing in. They believed that he had waited in the dark and watched the sisters as they danced and laughed together on the hilltop before launching his attack. His behavior in court was supposedly really disturbing, and it sounds like he really actually taunted Bibaa and Nicole's family and did things like this, looking at their mom. I mean, unreal. The jury found Daniel guilty on all counts. Now, a little less than a year after the murders of Bibaa Henry and Nicole Smallman, a 33-year-old woman named Sarah Everard left a friend's house and started walking back to her South London home. When she failed to meet her boyfriend as planned the following day, he reported her missing, and a search was very quickly launched. CCTV footage would reveal that Sarah had been stopped by an off-duty Metropolitan Police officer who was driving a rented car. He flashed his police badge at Sarah and falsely arrested her for breaching COVID-19 guidelines by being out without permission. A short time later, this off-duty police officer strangled Sarah and then disposed of her remains in a pond at a property that he owned. It was later uncovered that he had been plotting to kidnap and kill a woman for some time, and Sarah had been randomly selected. At this point, public trust in the Metropolitan Police was truly at an all-time low, and for Wilhelmina Smallman, it all felt too sickeningly familiar. She felt a tremendous sense of grief for Sarah Everard's family. But at the same time, she couldn't help but notice the stark differences between the amount of attention and public outrage that Sarah's case had received in comparison to her daughter's murders. Investigators took Sarah's disappearance seriously from the start, whereas Bibaa and Nicole's loved ones had to organize their own search parties, which again led to the extremely traumatic result of Nicole's boyfriend, Adam, being the one to discover their bodies. There was wall-to-wall coverage of Sarah Everard's case. Chances are you remember it. I certainly do. Which is in stark contrast to the amount of attention that Bibaa and Nicole's case received. Mina told the BBC, "I think that the notion of all people matter is absolutely right, but it's not true. Other people have more kudos in this world than people of color. That's what gives me purpose. If their lives make a change in the way women are viewed, and Black women in particular, because in the pecking order of things, we are the lowest on the ladder." Now, the two officers who had photographed Bibaa and Nicole's bodies both pleaded guilty to misconduct in public office. One officer was instantly dismissed from the police force, while the other had already resigned by the time he was in court. The men were sentenced to 2 years and 9 months in jail. The Metropolitan Police reported that there would be a review of Met Police culture and standards, and with an urgent review of all current investigations into allegation of sexual misconduct and domestic abuse against Metropolitan officers. They also published a new action plan for tackling violence against girls and women. And this is pretty significant. The Independent Office for Police Conduct held a separate inquiry into how police handled the initial reports that Bibaa Henry and Nicole Smallman were missing. And they found that the Metropolitan Police had failed to follow their missing persons policies and made other errors, and that the Met Police response to the case was, quote, below the standards that it should have been. The Met offered an official apology to the women's families, and the then commissioner stated, "While we know that very sadly Nicole and Bibaa had been murdered in the early hours of Saturday, June 6, 2020, before they were reported missing, if we had responded better, we may have saved their friends and family immeasurable pain. I am very sorry that the level of service we provided fell short." Now, in response to this report and the commissioner's statement, Bibaa and Nicole's mother, Wilhelmina Smallman, had this to say.
That report represents a time in our lives where we were desperate for our children to find them, that we had to put our own search party together. And the Met wants to offer us an apology. Are they mad?
Bibaa Henry and Nicole Smallman's loved ones suffered irreparable damage as a result of their murders. In the BBC documentary Two Daughters, their mother Wilhelmina said that she wanted her daughters to be remembered by how they lived, not how they died.
Bibaa, the amazing social worker who battled to make sure children were safe but families weren't broken up.
Minel? Is it Minel? Mane.
And Nikki, she was just a ray of light everywhere, and I know that will always be the way. And I think that's what we need to do. We need to find the sunshine in the rain.
Now, I just want to end with saying that this case really, really shows the quite morbid reality that as women, from the time we are little throughout the entirety of our lives, we have to recognize that we may be looked at as prey by random strangers who fantasize about murdering women. And while statistically women are far more likely to be killed by someone close to them, that doesn't change the fact that if you're a woman, chances are you probably don't feel safe walking around alone late at night in the dark. And what's really depressing about this case in particular is Bibaa and Nicole were together. They were celebrating Bibaa's birthday in what no doubt felt like an extra special celebration because of the pandemic that had kept everyone so isolated. So it's easy to imagine that being together, they not only were ecstatic, but that they felt safe because they were together, but they weren't safe. There was a murderous man lurking in the darkness. That was not something that was on their minds, and it's sad that it would have to be. As women, even if this scenario is statistically unlikely, you don't get the luxury of feeling safe, even if you're with your sister in a park late at night. That's just the reality. Thank you for watching, and please, as always, share your thoughts with me in the comments section. Until next time.